Thank you for downloading Business Matters from the BBC World Service. 50 minutes of interviews and discussion on the day's big news stories and themes from Asia, America and across the globe.
I'm Mike Powell. In the second half of Business Matters, I'll bring you our latest exclusive update of an ongoing aviation industry problem that won't go away. Pilots, crew and now passengers allege the air we breathe on board aircraft can do us harm. We'll hear from people who have lost their jobs or been involved in emergencies. An in-depth look at alleged toxic air on the world's planes here on Business Matters. Welcome to the second part of Business Matters. A year ago today, we investigated growing claims that some of the air that we breathe on board an aircraft can be harmful. In fact, pilots and aircrew allege that members of their community have died or been made seriously ill by so-called Aerotoxic Syndrome, the toxic air that enters a plane's cabin when a fume event takes place. Since our last reports, the UK Air Accidents Investigations Branch found that British Airways were operating a 10-year-old aircraft on which pilots reported smelling fumes 5 times in just 7 weeks. The source of the fumes has not been found, according to the report. British Airways insisted it would not fly an aircraft if it believed it posed any health or safety risk.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight.
This follows allegations that there have been around 300 possible fume events this year, with 85 alleged incidents on just one airline being reported by aircrew or engineers in just 2 months. A lot's happened in a year, and I've been discovering the latest developments. We start with a passenger involved in an emergency landing due to a fume event.
My husband and I were going on holiday to Valencia, and in the last 15 minutes of flight we were told by the captain that we were landing, and then 5 minutes later my husband heard a bang. All of a sudden the cabin started to fill with smoke.
Gail Fitzpatrick and her husband Stephen's experience on board their flight to Valencia in Spain this August isn't a rare one. They've spoken to me at this premiere of a film Everybody Flies on the subject of so-called fume events. Gail recorded the emergency landing on her plane and described it as a traumatic experience.
It was very thick, white, acrid smoke, and people started shouting, "Smoke, smoke." Planes started to descend very suddenly, and then you really start to panic because you're thinking something badly's gone wrong, there's no communications. And then we landed, and we could see that the cabin crew were scrambling to get the doors open. We eventually came down the chutes. Some people came off that flight and they were crying, some people were screaming, but altogether it was just a really surreal experience.
Gail alleges that British Airways didn't tell her or her fellow passengers what had happened on board the flight, but many kept in touch after the event on social media.
We've all been able to exchange information and ascertain that all of those people have had an absence of information, and they've been told the same platitudes of "we're still investigating." It may be months, it may be years before you hear anything, yet we hear that the same plane that we were on is back in operation. Now, who would send a plane back out in operation that you didn't have a report on what actually happened?
The Spanish authorities are investigating the Valencia emergency. The Air Accident Investigations Branch report said that engineering inspections after the incident had not found any faults in the aircraft. British Airways declined to speak to us whilst the Spanish investigation was ongoing, but refuted that they haven't offered support to those involved in the Valencia emergency. The company told us,
"We know this was an upsetting time, so we have stayed close to our customers, offering ongoing help and support. 21 additional British Airways staff were sent to Valencia to look after our customers, and within 24 hours, everyone on the flight was given a personal BA contact in our dedicated support team. We have offered to fund counselling and flying with confidence courses, and are committed to continue this close contact for as long as our customers would like it. We are legally unable to comment on causes until the Spanish air accident investigation is concluded."
Such events, of course, aren't restricted to just one airline. In most modern planes, apart from the Boeing 787, the air that you breathe comes from the engines, and when an aircraft has a fume event, it can be as a result of hot engine oil fumes and organophosphates leaking through the engine seals as so-called bleed air into the cabin air supply.
And folks from the flight deck, we do understand that smoke has gotten a little bit worse in the cabin there. We are getting priority handling into San Francisco. We should have you on the ground here very, very shortly.
US Airways Flight 432, flying from Phoenix to Maui, was over the Pacific Ocean when a thick smoke started to fill the cabin. I went to the annual conference on global air cabin quality at London's Imperial College this autumn to discover the very latest developments to address the problems. Not one airline or regulator was present despite being invited, but PAL Aerospace were. They've been developing an air filter to monitor cabin air, and they'll soon be fitted on EasyJet planes. That's the low-cost carrier which operates mainly in Europe. And two of EasyJet's pilots are currently involved in a lengthy court case in Paris to make Aerotoxic Syndrome a recognised illness. One of them is Captain Eric Bailey, who's battling his way on several fronts within the French and European legal systems. It's an attempt to set a precedent by which all future fume event cases could be measured.
I just lost my pilot license due to several fume events, and therefore I've been diagnosed with Aerotoxic Syndrome. In France, we have a system which is a bit different than one in the UK. So we have a different litigation, and we are dealing with European court as well.
Talk me through where you are now with regard to that whole process and why you decided to do that.
Well, first of all, because you have no choice. A lot of crew in the same situation. Some of them are in quite desperate situation. They have no income at all. And one of my friends, he was a professional rugby player. He lost his medical license due to a fume event and aerotoxic syndrome. And now he can not walk at all. He's completely incapacitated. And in that case, of course, you need to find some financial compensation. Otherwise, these people are simply homeless.
You were sacked basically from EasyJet because of your failure of a medical?
Absolutely. I simply lost my medical, so I could not fly anymore as a pilot. However, I'm still able to do some ground instruction.
Tell me what you hope to get out of this court case.
Well, now I'm 56 years old, so my main expectation today is to use my own case as a reference case for other people coming behind me.
But it's an uphill struggle. Here we are, autumn 2019. How long has this court case been going on?
Unfortunately, this is going to take another couple of years. However, we have good reason to be optimistic. So about the criminal case, this is already year 4. We expect the case for at least 5 to 6 years. For the civil case of occupational war case, that usually take about 1 to 2 years in France. So we should have the first result next year.
EasyJet, Captain Eric Bailey's previous employer, didn't want to speak to us. But in a statement, they said,
EasyJet cannot comment on any ongoing legal case ahead of the ruling. EasyJet is a responsible employer and operates one of the world's most modern fleets, and our aircraft are all fully compliant with the latest standards in terms of air quality and air conditioning. The health and well-being of our passengers and crew is EasyJet's highest priority.
While Captain Bailey fights his case in European courts, ex-Australian stewardess Judy Cullinane was admitted to the bar in Queensland as a practising solicitor. I caught up with her at the Aircraft Cabin Air Conference in London, where she told me how her flying career, which she loved, came to an abrupt end.
I was flying 3 days on the same aircraft, and we kept swelling up, feeling really hot, tired. And when we got to the port on the first and second night, normally we'd go downstairs and party with the crew and have a few drinks. That wasn't the case. We just wanted to go to bed. On the third day, flying back to Perth from Cairns via Alice, when we got on the aircraft, it smelt like dirty socks. There was oil all along underneath the overhead lockers. Just after takeoff, I had tingling, extreme fatigue, like I was struggling to stay awake. And I was picking up the PA to say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Alice Springs. And it was like I was drunk. I was slurring, it was dyslexic coming out the wrong way, and some of the passengers started laughing. And the crew got up the front and they said to me, "What the hell happened to you?" And they looked at me and I was grey and my eyes were dilated. A few days later, I went across to see the company on an A320 Perth to Melbourne, which is, about a 3.5, 4 hour flight. Just after takeoff, the extreme nausea, the tiredness, it had got worse. I walked off the aircraft and collapsed and was taken by wheelchair to a doctor at the Melbourne terminal. And he said to me, "Oh, you need to see another doctor. I don't want to get involved." And that was to become a frequent thing by any medical specialist. I saw the company doctor. He gave me a full physical and said, "You need to go back and get whatever tests and you're just like the other pilots." That was the first time I'd known that there was other people off. That ended my career. After that, they wouldn't let me fly and denied my workers' compensation claim. I then fought through the courts. I instigated a Senate inquiry in Australia. The Senate inquiry took a couple of years. My court case took nearly 5 years. I settled out of court in a 10-hour settlement.
While many legal cases are settled on the court steps, as was the case for Judy Cullinane, the Paris court case involving EasyJet and the French government rumbles on, and a major test case is imminent at London's Royal Courts of Justice. Over 100 crew asked for their cases to be heard. Only a few have been chosen by the unions. This former captain, who asked us to withhold his name, is one of the lead cases.
I've had 4 or 5 Fume events during my career. The final Fume event, which pushed me over the edge, left me in a wheelchair on the way to hospital. Was in and out of hospitals, in and out of doctors' surgeries for a number of months. Eventually went for a brain scan. And they found a brain tumour. Also, they diagnosed respiratory problems, liver injuries, even though I don't drink alcohol. It's very difficult to explain to people what's happened because they don't fully understand the effects of these oils on the human body.
But as a captain, you knew what oils were being used in those engines.
I did. The doses that you're exposed to, that I've now discovered subsequently, are quite low, and it appears to build up in your system over a period of time.
You're basically fighting now for public awareness and for something to be done about this in the aviation industry.
Yeah, I want to be put back in the position I was before I was injured. If someone came to me and said, "Here, would you like £100,000, which leg would you like me to chop off?" I'd say no, but my leg's effectively been chopped off and I want some sort of help to get my life back to where it was. Because it's not an easy fix. The aircraft are designed effectively to... It's like having an exhaust pipe out of your car and then heating your car from the exhaust pipe. That's how the air system works. The air comes through the engine, straight into the cabin, and from the engine there's always going to be oil vapours in the air.
On every flight?
On every flight, regardless. It'll be a minute amount or a large amount, depending on whether there's been a fume event or not.
You say that you want to get back your life to how it was before all of this happened. Would that mean you going back to flying aircraft?
With the brain tumour, I don't think that's going to happen now. It's very unlikely. The operation that's needed for the tumour is quite a delicate one, which could end up leaving me worse than I am now. So I'd love to go back to flying, of course I would. But I don't think that's an option at the moment.
A licensed aircraft engineer who I've spoken to, who wishes to remain anonymous, told me about his concerns. His exact words have been voiced by an actor.
My colleagues and I are bound by an aircraft maintenance manual. One chapter is dedicated to unusual events, where most things under this category can be monitored. Fume events often can't. Engineers, pilots and crew want monitoring equipment to be installed to help identify and address the problem. I have to make a decision whether to pull an aircraft from service or not, so procedures need to be updated, with engineers being given more power to prevent aircraft from flying if needs be. There's less hangar space nowadays, and usually what space there is full of aircraft having maintenance, but there's not much space for what's called a casualty aeroplane. If that changes and crew continue to report fume events, airlines will have to act.
The engineer told me that he and his team have been under increasing pressure to get aircraft involved in fume events flying as soon as possible. After all, aircraft only make airlines money when they're in the air. Tony Cable was a member of the UK Air Accident Investigations Branch for 30 years. He admits the problem of toxic air on aircraft has been around for 60 years, but it's only now that people are becoming aware of the issue.
Having been raised, first of all, in 1966, it's time for a little action to see what the problems are and what can be done about them. And there apparently are ways of fixing things with filtration and possibly warning systems.
Because we seem to be seeing more and more fume events, or we're hearing about fume events much more because of fume registers and crew actually reporting it more now.
Certainly on the aviation news services, there seem to be a pretty large number, something like 1 or 2 a day worldwide.
And that's quite startling when you see these fume events being reported. As an air accident investigator, what would your priority be to establish what had happened?
Well, it is a substantial number. You've got to remember the scale of world aviation. I mean, scheduled air transport, I think last year worldwide was 4.3 billion passengers. It needs some research on what levels of oil contamination there are in the cabin air, and also what the health effects are, both for a low rate, low concentration, but for a long period, and a high concentration for a short period when there's a smoke event.
And you're quite controversial in trying to get the airlines to deal with this, not necessarily from a safety perspective, but from a financial perspective.
Well, I think safety is the end result, but I suspect personally the way to do that is to appeal to financial arguments, cost-benefit analysis of taking some corrective measures against what might be the cost down the road, long term.
Meanwhile, another crew member who had to leave flying due to ill health keeps long lists of numerous incidents. Trudy Dad.
I've been listing fume events for 2 years now, proving that the aviation industry statements about fume events being rare are simply not true. They're happening all the time. From all this, what shocked me most of all is how quickly these aircraft are in and out of the hangar after having a fume event. I've seen the decontamination procedure recommended by Airbus, and it involves an awful lot of work. I've been told it would take well over 100 hours to complete, but most of these aircraft are back in service within 24 hours of having a fume event. So by logging all these aircraft and their registrations, we can see patterns. It's blatantly obvious what is going on. So why can't the regulator, the CAA, see this?
13 September, B8348, London Heathrow to Nice, GEUXI.
17th of October, BA2666, London Gatwick to Marrakesh, GATL.
5th of September, BA2597, Verona to London Gatwick, GG.
29th of October, BA979, Hanover to London Heathrow, GTT.
The list of alleged affected aircraft continues to be published online, but as we've heard, the airlines like to refer to fume events now as odour events, and they say they cover a wide range of issues. Over the past 12 months, I've been asking the UK regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority, for an interview, but they've declined. Instead, they told me,
"Our priority is always the safety of passengers and crew, and we continue to work with airlines, manufacturers and international regulators to drive improvements in safety standards across the industry. We understand the concerns that have been raised about cabin air quality, and we take very seriously any suggestions that people have suffered ill health from their experience of flying. On the basis of an assessment of the published scientific research evidence, including research commissioned by the government and the EU, we have concluded that there is no positive evidence of a link between exposure to contaminants in cabin air and any long-term health effects, although such a link cannot be excluded."
Equally, I've asked the US regulator, the FAA, to take part in this programme, but they didn't respond. In my previous reports this year, we've addressed possible solutions for what seems to be an ongoing problem for the aviation industry. At the annual Aircraft Cabin Air Conference, I managed to catch up with Professor Dieter Schultz from Hamburg University. He's an expert in aircraft design and systems, to find out if there have been any further developments.
The only way to accelerate that problem is not to wait until an airplane is being phased out, but to modify them as best as it is possible. And that would be to add filters. It doesn't solve the problem totally, but if you have a certain concentration level of contaminants, then whatever level that is, it can be brought down to 18% if you have total filtration and filtration in the recirculation line.
And the filters are now available to be able to do that.
Yeah, we have one company here on the Congress and they're also displaying these filters. So it is there and they're working on putting it into the airplane. The recirculation filters, it's just another spare part, so that's easy, and many airlines do that already. But that's bringing down the concentration level only to 60%. When you have total filtration, that means the air that comes from the engine is definitely going that filter right away. Then you have this better efficiency.
Yeah. Surely the airline world has already kind of dealt with this situation by bringing out the Boeing 787.
Yes, interesting. It's not being advertised as the problem solver. Boeing is advertising this airplane with more electric systems, and the bleed air system or the environmental control system, one of them, as an airplane which is saving fuel with innovative aircraft systems. Now, the story is quite easy. If you have a fleet and you do something good with one airplane, you cannot advertise it on a critical point because you would point fingers at your other airplanes.
Dr. Sarah Mackenzie-Ross is a consultant clinical neuropsychologist and professor at the University College London. She and her team have done some research into the issue of aerotoxic incidents, but with so many fume events being reported now, she told me a lot more research needs to be done.
No large-scale epidemiological study has ever been commissioned. You would need two things. One is funding. The other thing you need is access to airline pilots and aircrew. Given our area of expertise, what we would like to do is a large-scale neuropsychological / clinical study, because there are many aspects of the life of a pilot and aircrew that are potentially harmful to health, such as working shift work, jet lag and chronic sleep deprivation. And one of the frustrating things is that a lot of the regulatory authorities, like the CAA and the airlines, will tell you that there's a substantial body of research is out there which they have reviewed, and there is no evidence or limited evidence to suggest that contaminated air is harmful. Now, what I would say in response to that is absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. So my feeling at the moment is the quality of the studies that have been reviewed is quite weak, and that really there's been a lack of research on this topic of any decent quality.
Meanwhile, crew continue to report unusual occurrences on board the aircraft they're operating. This BA stewardess told the film premiere audience of Everybody Flies in London that she had just come off such an eventful flight.
I was in a fume incident yesterday. After taking off in Miami airport, other crew from first class came down and he was like, "Guys, can you smell it?" And then straight away we informed the captain, the flight crew. But then we started to descend. We could just smell that something just wasn't right again, and quite few of us felt something just wasn't right, but nothing was visible. So it's really hard to put your finger on it when you cannot really see it. So my reaction was I just kept falling asleep.
British Airways told us that they want crew like Diana to report such events.
As a responsible employer, we always encourage our colleagues to tell us about any concerns, with reports passed on to the Civil Aviation Authority.
BA also say they're working closely with manufacturers and regulators, analysing new information and technologies.
Safety is our first priority, and every report is thoroughly investigated. Fume or odour events have been found to be caused by a wide range of issues, including burnt food in the oven, aerosols and e-cigarettes and de-icing fluid. We would never operate an aircraft if we believed it posed any health or safety risk to our customers or crew.
This year, our 3 investigations have examined how the subject of toxic air on aircraft internationally has refused to go away. We've heard airlines and regulators say they're aware of incidents and they're investigating them. But for a growing number of flight attendants, pilots and now passengers, that's not good enough. In the coming months, a number of high-profile court cases are to be heard. As she told me at the Aircraft Cabin Air Conference in London, Judy Cullinane, the ex-Ansett stewardess who's now a lawyer, says 2020 will put the global aviation industry even more under the spotlight.
Around the world, there's a lot of cases in Canada, quite a few in the USA, and there's quite a few in London. The claimants all have the same symptoms. The defence usually will argue based on the testing and the aircrafts. At the moment, the regulations are different in every country, and that is the hardest thing. France is different to Canada, is different to Australia. So there's a wide range, there's big class actions happening, and there's a lot of actions in 2020 that come to court.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that at a conference like this over 2 days, airlines and regulators were invited to take part, yet they refused.
Look, it's disappointing because they should be working together. In a court case, it's always the best lawyer wins with the best argument. This isn't about that. At these events is where you want industry together. You want people to work together to find a solution, or if not, how to manage the problem. And that is the biggest thing here. There's a risk to health, to safety, but there's a risk to reputation, to an airline and to manufacturers, and that's a financial risk. And boards should be taking that very seriously. Denying the problem is not a solution to fixing the problem or managing the problem. And I would say the same to airlines, stop putting your head in the sand and work together.
Throughout 2019, we brought you 3 different reports on business matters on this fast-moving aviation story. And of course, we'll keep you updated as we head into a new decade. But we'd also like to hear from you. Will this change your flying habits? Next time you book a flight, will you be mindful of the potential of a fume event? Or is it just another risk you have to take? Email us at world.business@bbc.co.uk.